games, comics, anime. Codenamed Epic.
Do you want to start with how you, well, just take it from your, I mean, you write more than comics as well. So how did you get established, break in, etc.?
Well, I came in from writing crime fiction. I write thriller novels, and I was a bunch of books in, and Axel Alonso, thank you. Axel Alonso, who is the, I know we're on a DC panel, but Axel, of course, is the editor-in-chief over at Marvel, and I got this sort of phone call that's the offer you can't refuse, where it was from Axel, and he said, listen, I'm calling you from Marvel. You can pick any character from the Marvel vaults, more or less. He had a range of different choices, and you can have your own limited series if you want to. So I was really calm and collected about it, but my inner geek boy was like doing cartwheels. I mean, it was insane. And so the first comic that I wrote that wound up coming out was The Punisher. Are there any Garth Ennis fans in here? Let's see, show of hands. All right, cool. So that was my favorite comic in the world, and I wrote it. They needed somebody a little bit outside of comics to follow up Garth because he had that epic 7-year run, and they brought me in. I did the first. It was like I was either gonna make my career in comics or I was never gonna work in comics again. It was just, there's nothing in between because there was so much heat going on with it. And I wound up writing it, and I had the most surreal experience when I went to the comic shop because I could no longer buy my favorite book, which for 7 years had been Garth Ennis' Punisher because I was writing it, and that was pretty insane. And that was my first break in. Did you have that experience like when? Well, Marvel doesn't send you copies of your own book, but when you pick up a copy of your own book, sorry, is that better? Okay, when you pick up a copy of your own book. And do you ever, I mean, you look at it, and I've had experiences where, like, my first issue of Nightwing happened to be sitting next to Chuck Dixon's first issue of Nightwing, and you realize all of a sudden, like, not only the responsibility you have, but how much it's going to suck if you fuck this up. And then you moved it over on top of the Chuck Dixon, which was really bad form to do in the comic shop.
Right.
Yeah, no, it's always really weird. I mean, most writers are writers because we grew up reading and we were obsessed with reading. And I've had that on both sides of the fence. I've now, with crime fiction, I grew up reading Michael Connelly, Robert Crais, like all these people who are now colleagues. And it's a similar thing, like when you go and you write, for me, I'm away writing my Punisher and trying to honor the stuff that Garth did, but you're trying to do something new because why are they going to hire Kyle Higgins to do something if you're going to just imitate other people?
That's actually why they hire me. My page rate is so much cheaper that they just figure, why get Bendis when we can get Higgins?
But you try and bring your own spin. It's like the whole thing, and I think that's a lot of what the New 52 is about, is it's like you want to bring, I got to bring something to the table that is my own, that's my own voice, but there's this public trust with these characters, so you can't spin them too far afield or else people will get angry. So that's the line that we walk. And it was weird for me, when the first Punishers went off to Garth. I think that was one place that I sensed it. And it was funny because Axel told me, he's like, you can't have, I wrote Moon Knight too, and I had a crossover with Moon Knight and Spider-Man, and we were talking about what you can do, and Axel was like, look, you can't have Spider-Man kill a busload of nuns, like there's some things you just can't do because
I'm doing it next month.
Exactly. Well, and it's like Punisher's going to be killing people long after I'm dead and gone, we're playing, we're sort of entrusted with these characters for a while, and then we're going to kick off, and they're going to be here in 100 years still talking about them. But talk to me about, I know that Nightwing's one of your favorite characters. I mean, that's sort of your gold standard. So what happened when you got that book? What's the story behind that?
Well, and I guess we should mention, just in case anyone doesn't know, Greg is currently writing Penguin, Pain and Prejudice, which is a 5-issue, is it 5-issue?
Yeah, it's a 5-issue miniseries.
And I'm writing Nightwing and Deathstroke within the Batman universe. So, yeah, Nightwing, it was an interesting kind of chain of events that got me to the book. I guess I'll do a you and start with the beginning. So I started at the University of Iowa and then transferred to Chapman University and started studying writing when I was at Iowa, but I wanted to be a film director. And when I transferred out to Chapman, I started my thesis film, which was a big superhero noir about the superhero labor union of 1960 Chicago. It's called The League, and it took me like a year to make. So when I was done with it, one of my best friends, who became my best friend throughout it, I had hired him to design all the characters. His name is Eric White. He's a big comic book artist and writer. And as the film was progressing, he asked if I had an agent, and I said no because I'm in college. And he offered to introduce me to some people, and he started handing out the movie to everyone he knew in the comic book industry and the film industry. And once I finished it and put it online and I started doing a lot of marketing for it, Eric sent this big email out to everyone he knew. And I got a lot of responses back, which was amazing because it's like a 25-minute movie, and so for people to actually take the time to watch that is kind of tricky. But one of the people that got back to me was Joe Quesada, and who is at the time was the editor-in-chief of Marvel, and he seemed to really like it and said if there's ever anything he could do for me to let him know. And I said, if you're ever looking
how about work?
I said, if you're ever looking for new writers, you should let me know. And we bantered back and forth, and then he made fun of Jeff Loeb and the fact that I knew him, and I said, well, to be fair, I don't like him, and then that got me more points. No, I'm just kidding. But so I started pitching to Marvel, managed to get a Captain America one-shot like 10 months later, and then started...
That was your first paid writing job?
My first paid writing job ever was an issue of Captain America.
And where were you working for your day job? Let's hear it.
I was working at Sherwin-Williams. I've probably seen some of you before. I used to sell and deliver paint all over Los Angeles, which was funny because I went over to Greg's house the other night up on Mulholland, and I had totally driven by there before in the big like Ford F-150 truck with like 100 gallons of paint in the bed.
Painted the house and totally fucked it up before we moved in.
Exactly. I'm a much better writer than I am painter, I'll say that. So ultimately I managed to convince Mike Martz at DC that I wasn't completely incompetent, and he gave me a shot with, did you guys read any of the Batman Incorporated stuff? Do you guys know who Night Runner is? The French-Algerian Muslim Batman of Paris. So that was my first DC work. And from there, I got Gates of Gotham, and they called me to hire me for Deathstroke as part of the relaunch. And I told them, you realize I've never even written a miniseries before, because I hadn't even turned in the first issue of Gates of Gotham yet. And they said, well, that's fine. And at the time, I was then writing 3 books a month and working as a sound editor. And so I quit my job and ended up in New York, and they knew how much I loved Nightwing. And the job opened up a little late in the game, actually, and they hired me for it. And it was a very short while before the.
Where were you when you got hired? Where were you when you got the phone call?
I was in Long Island City working out of some coffee shop, and I was getting ready to fly home the next day to Los Angeles from New York, and they called and asked me to come in. And then proceeded. That's
either really good news or really bad news.
Exactly. I assumed it was bad news to begin with, but so it's been just a big kind of challenge ever since. So, but yeah, Nightwing is, sorry, the long answer to that is Nightwing is my all-time favorite character. So he's the one that I grew up reading. It was like, that was my book when I was like 12, and I've read every issue and collected every issue. And like even my film, to bring it all back, was about a former sidekick who now comes back as a darker hero. So
that's cool. Those full circle things.
Yeah.
I was when I was a kid, in 6th, 7th grade was when I was really like peak into comics. Like that's where I really caught the bug. And there was this one comic shop, I grew up in Saratoga, Northern California, that we used to always go to. And I still remember the guy said, there's this character who's really blowing out right now called the Punisher. And you gotta buy him. And I remember they just started the Unlimited. So of course I bought like 10 copies because it was gonna be worth like millions of dollars. You know, I still have them all. And they're worth like, instead of 75 cents, they're worth like $1.50 each now, I think.
That's why you had to hire me to paint your house.
Exactly.
You couldn't afford anyone good.
But it was so funny. So then, you know, you fast forward years and years. I was obsessed with Punisher, that first limited series, all that. And years later, I came to the Comic-Con down in San Diego, and I was walking through the aisles, and I saw the booth for that first comic shop, and the guy who was there, and I walked over to him, and I said, I'm pretty much here because of you. You know, when I was in 6th grade, I came in, and you told me about this character called the Punisher, and I'm here doing a Marvel panel, and I'm writing the Punisher right now. and it was such a cool experience
cool.
for me. To be able to come back and sort of see him again, and I think for him to also see, that what happened.
There's a store. I'm from Chicago. There's a store that I grew up going to, and I've known the guy who's run it since I was probably like 12 or 13. And so when my first issue of Supreme Power and Deathstroke came out, which they actually came out like the same week, I happened to be in Chicago. And so I ended up going in and doing a signing at the store that I grew up going to, which was really cool. So
Batman universe, the Batverse. When you tackle it, there's a ton of heat and focus and attention. This is not something you can take really lightly and just play around with. And I caught a little bit of that. Kyle mentioned the series that I'm writing is called Penguin, Pain and Prejudice, and it's sort of.
How many of you guys have been reading it and picking it up? It's pretty dark and twisted, isn't it? It's AKA awesome.
It's a little dirty. It's sort of a dirty Penguin book, but it's a mini series, and that was my first job over at DC, so obviously it's my first Batman job. And I got the call from Mike Martz that they were looking at different things. I did some Wolverine standalones, Punisher, Moon Knight. I did an Ares, playing around mostly in the Marvel sandbox. And I had a chance to have a meal with Dan Didio, and it was the same conversation of what do you want to do? And for some reason, I always loved the Penguin, even though the Penguin isn't one of the most popular characters, one of the most enduring characters. But for me, out of the household name Batman villains, the Penguin is the only one who's totally sane. And that was so interesting to me, because if you think about the Riddler, the Joker, Mad Hatter, you go down the list, and I wanted to paint him as a really cold, not a psychopath, but somebody who's very cold and calculating. And I went back and read all the great Penguin stories, and there's been some absolutely fantastic ones. Has anyone here read the Joker's Asylum, the Jason Aaron, Jason Pearson one?
That might be my favorite Penguin story ever. When we did Gates of Gotham, we specifically modeled our Penguin. I mean, I wrote the Penguin that I knew from the animated series because that's my favorite version of him. But Trevor specifically modeled his Penguin
after Pearson.
After Pearson's. Yeah.
It's fantastic. And I read that and I felt like I got it. I got how to do the character. And it just stuck with me. So when I had this, there was a breakfast meeting. I literally was driving over and I just thought, instead of what's the one dream thing I would want to write if I could do anything in the Batman universe? And so we sat down. I said, I want to do my own whole take on the Penguin. I want to take sort of that kernel from that great Jason Pearson, Jason Aaron story and blow it out and do a lot more extensive backstory and really write this thing. Because there's been great Penguin stories written over the years, but there's never been sort of a big comprehensive backstory that stretches out longer. And so that's what I tackled. And as just a sort of insider thing in the comic, I give Oswald 3 brothers, and one of the brothers is called Jason, and that's after Jason Aaron for his sort of reinvention of that. That's my homage to him.
So is there, going forward, are there any characters in the Batverse besides the Penguin or on the hero side that you would want to tackle? Obviously, Batman, and we all would like to write Batman.
I'm thinking of taking over Nightwing, and so.
Yeah. I hear that the current guy is so good that
it's not an opening.
They need a hack to come in after him.
Just do a road
just to kind
confidence.
of cleanse the palate of awesomeness so that a better person can
For some reason, I'm really gravitate to the villains. I don't know what's wrong with me. I love Azarella's Joker.
Yeah.
And I think part of that might be coming from a kind of crime background. I love writing the self-contained stories like you did so well in Gates of Gotham that we should talk about in a minute.
Sure.
But I love having my own sort of open and closed story like with the Penguin, even if it's going to tie into the New 52 and it's going to be part of continuity. But I like having my own room. And so some of the other villains for me are intriguing for what I would want to tackle next, to sort of just take a villain. And the one thing that was really fun in doing the Penguin is, from the Penguin's perspective, Batman is the villain. And so that's how that miniseries is written. It's written from the Penguin as the protagonist. We get his point of view the most clearly, and Batman is a bully just like all the other bullies who always controlled him and told him what to do.
That's probably my favorite moment within the first, I don't want to give anything away, so just within the first 2 issues. The end of issue 1. Issue 1 basically paints this really dark, complex picture of this villain who will literally destroy your entire life if you look at him the wrong way. And he's this kind of all-powerful, omnipotent being within his own little universe. And then all of a sudden Batman crashes in at the end of the first issue, and you see how kind of trivial the Penguin really is within the grand scheme of, you know, Gotham City. It was a great inversion to see Batman come in and basically make this incredibly powerful character seem so weak, you know, with just a look.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think the point is we see what Oswald will do if somebody looks at him wrong or says the wrong comment. So if Batman comes in and basically knocks him over and he feels shame, what are the lengths he's going to be willing to go to punish Gotham? And that's really what the story becomes.
And of course, it's in front of everyone, and there's
and everyone laughs, and it's like it's the whole horrible thing from all of our collective childhoods.
Right.
Or is it just me? Okay, let's talk about Gates of Gotham for a minute. So I loved it. It's fantastic.
I'm glad you didn't hate it. That would have made a very awkward, although more interesting panel.
Yeah, it's always awkward before a panel when you like catch up on everything, and you can tell if the panel. It's a good way. You can always tell if the panel mates don't like each other's work. If they're like, "Oh, it was very interesting." Interesting is always like the damning with faint praise adjective. But Gates of Gotham's great. How many of you guys read Gates of Gotham? It's fantastic. How did you handle the history element? It's so funny because I started it and I thought the whole thing was going to be set in the origins, and all of a sudden there's this jarring jump forward into present tense, into a present tense mystery that has its roots that stretch back more than a century.
Well, originally, and for those of you that haven't read it, it's a mini-series. It was a 5-issue mini-series that I wrote, and Scott Snyder and I came up with the story, and then I wrote the book. And the last couple issues I co-wrote with Ryan Parrott, who's a good friend of mine and a very talented writer. And originally, the genesis of the idea was to do a large, sweeping kind of mystery that would bring all these Bat family characters together, but would have roots in the different eras of Gotham. And I think the idea came out of Return of Bruce Wayne and how well that did, and you know, everyone seemed to really respond and enjoy the different nuggets of what Gotham used to be. So the whole point of this was to kind of explore that world that hadn't been touched before. But to me, I wanted to focus really on one era, and that was the one that's most interesting to me, and it's the Gilded Age, and it's basically the beginning of the modern city, the rise of the skyscrapers in America, and especially in Gotham City. There's obviously that there's a connotation that Gotham wasn't always meant to be this dark, brooding, twisted place. So what turned it into that? So beginning with from there, we just kind of extrapolated out the gates being the bridges, and then turning into something else, which I don't want to spoil if you haven't read it.
Who's the artist on that? Was
Trevor McCarthy.
He did a fantastic job. It's got that pre-steampunk edge to the historical scenes, and then he shakes up the style for the present tense.
Well, and that was the thing that really we all kind of latched onto, was by especially doing like the Rise of the Skyscrapers, you could also get a steampunk kind of quality to it, and building the villain that had that kind of that look. Of course, the suit has a story reason for its why it looks that way. It's actually a pressure suit that almost like a diving suit that construction workers would have used to dig deep enough for the foundations of skyscrapers, which was actually a very real problem of how you lay a foundation big enough and deep enough that could support a structure of that size. So. And that's kind of how I just always approach things. Is I'm a very kind of
how did you like writing something that was close-ended versus doing the ongoing?
I love it.
It's very different, right?
Yeah, it is very different. I'm much more of a I'm much more of a film guy versus a TV guy. I love TV and episodic TV, but I guess serialized would be more the term. But it's really, really hard to do because I write very thematically, and I come at things with very clear arcs for my characters and my story. And when you're then extrapolating that across an ongoing series like I'm doing right now in Nightwing or Deathstroke, it's really, really challenging because there's no ending. I mean, you put the character through their paces, but then you have to build off that. And
do you plot when you do the open-ended, when you're on Unlimited, do you plot in like 5-issue bites, 6-issue bites?
Yeah, it depends. The other thing about doing an ongoing series, which you don't run into with a mini, is that it's within the same universe as a lot of other books. So especially within the Bat universe, Nightwing, as much as I love him, is built on the core of being Robin, of having been Robin, having been Batman. That's one of the things that makes him so interesting, is that he's a character trying to get out from under the shadow of Batman. So Batman,
two different ways.
Exactly, and Batman naturally is going to play a role in the book, which means that I have to coordinate much more with whoever's writing Batman. Right now it's Scott Snyder, so it's great because Scott and I are really, really good friends from Gates of Gotham. But it tends
How
to...
miserable would it be if you didn't get along at all? Like totally different creative taste.
I've had that.
That you're calling, going, we need to coordinate this. Here's my story idea. And they're like, here's my story idea.
Yeah. I mean, the other... Yeah. Well, I'm not going to get into details.
No naming names at the Batman panel. They're being recorded.
Yeah. But just to answer the question about Gates, the jumping forward and jumping back, to me, I didn't want to just be intercutting between the past and the present. I wanted it to be a motivated flashback. So the way we structured it was around this idea of a journal. And so as we're going forward in the history, essentially the present day catches up to the journal, which sounds really weird to say, but it turns out in like issue 4, you realize that all the journal entries that you've been reading have been from when Dick decided to sit down with the journal after he found it, and Dick reads it cover to cover. So it was just a way to tie in, and then obviously there's the mystery of why the villain now is bombing Gotham City and destroying what he's destroying, and how that relates to the formation, the early days of Gotham, the creation of the city, and what I call like the oligarchy of power that actually runs things. So,
all right, so we're gonna interrupt this for a quick poll, because there was a poll online yesterday that had totally bizarre results, and the question was this, because the result was really weird how it split. If you could be Batman or the Joker, which would you choose to be? So I want to do this by quick show of hands. So first of all, who would rather be the Joker? All right, who would rather be Batman? Okay, online, this is so bizarre. It was totally split between women and men. And which do you think is which? Women would rather be the Joker. It was like the weirdest thing, and with guys, it was this huge skew that was on the line. So I figured, what better way to reproduce this than at the Batman panel at Comikaze?
Do you think that, who do you think is more psychotic?
The Joker.
Really?
Standard answer,
Really?
but he still is. He still's got to be the tip. So let me ask you this, since we're here in the Batman room. What do you think the quality is? See, I've always felt like that's one quick question. The other one that's obviously is a hugely defining question, and I actually asked this of a lot of crime fiction writers on the novel and the book side too. Like when I'm going down, if we're doing an interview or conversation, it's like one of the big defining things obviously is who do you like better, Superman or Batman? That seems to me like that's sort of an essential divide, like Red Sox, Yankees, Stones, Beatles.
Right.
What do you think the single quality is that makes Batman different than any other superhero?
I think that Batman is kind of that peak of human potential. I mean, he's kind of the embodiment of what you could be with an insane amount of self-discipline and drive and determination. Now, obviously, there's a fine line, although it does kind of blur and become gray between being driven and being kind of obsessed and being pathological. So to me, like that's what's always been interesting. If I write Bruce ever in a more kind of long-term way, that's really what has always interested me, was where is that line? Where does that line draw?
And where is that line? Like what do you think is something Batman? Per my conversation with Axel, where it's like obviously if you're Spider-Man, very different rules and parameters. You can't have Spider-Man. The Punisher can kill everybody, however viciously, but he can't kill bystanders, obviously.
Well, I think Batman, and it's actually the reason why I like Nightwing so much, because Batman is a character that does what he does. Bruce does what he does out of this sense of guilt. He fights this kind of esoteric concept of crime and bad people and bad things, and it's very kind of like it's a very, like I said, like an esoteric. It's an idea, but it's all kind of motivated by his sense of guilt over what happened to his parents, and he's really a dude that can't get over his past. Whereas why I enjoy writing Nightwing so much, and this is something I'm really going to be exploring in my second arc. Dick does what he does because he enjoys it. He enjoys helping people. So whereas Bruce and Batman feel like they have to, Dick does it because he's a social person. And to me, where Batman is that symbol of fear, Nightwing can be that symbol of hope and inspiration within Gotham City. And so I think people respond to Batman in a couple different ways. The reason they like him so much is because it's like, and especially the way a lot of writers portray him, he has all the answers. He always knows. Like he is the person with the backup plan for the backup plan for the backup plan. And you could never actually successfully be Batman. I mean, like no one, like it's especially within the world of reading, like the reality of being a superhero aside, you could never actually be Batman. You could be Nightwing. You could be Robin. I mean, but how that relates to Superman then was a different question, because I think people who like Batman for Batman like him because of that sense of perfection that he is. But compared to Superman, Batman is more relatable, because he could die. He can get hurt. Whereas Superman, I don't know what I would do with Superman if I ever wrote him.
It's funny because I always think of the darkness in Batman. Batman's obviously, of all the major, no shit household name characters,
right,
he's the darkest. And I think part of it is that the obsessive drive, when it's taken to that extreme, it comes with certain costs that are significant. It's so bizarre because in a way, as he's striving for perfection, there's all the things he's leaving behind, and there's all the relationships that he necessarily spoils.
Well, and it raises that question of, do you think he wants crime gone? Like, do you think he actually wants to get rid of it? I mean, like, because it's that question of, if there was no one to fight, well, then what?
Who is he?
Right. I mean, that was actually something that I played around with in the League. It's this idea of the superheroes. If there was a Justice League, that stuff, crime, villains, would be cleaned up so fast. And the idea I play with is, okay, what happens when they clean up the city too fast? They actually have to start paying villains to create a purpose for themselves.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You haven't seen the film, have you?
Which one?
Mine.
Huh?
Mine.
I saw the trailer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here, want to pass the mic around?
We should pass a mic around.
Did you happen to see the movie Megamind by any chance?
Which movie?
Megamind.
Megamind. No.
Yeah, because for all those who have seen it, Will Ferrell is the bad guy, and he wants to, and once he kills the superhero, he wants another superhero to fight. So that's kind of related to the plot.
Yep.
Right.
Builds it in.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
Sure.
We'll pass this around for questions in a few more
minutes. Sure.
So start preparing your questions. Well, should we go to some questions now?
Yeah, sure.
Should we kick
Might
it
as well.
out?
Do you guys
Sure.
have questions?
How do you want to do this? Should we pass around the mic, or do you want to just stand up and shout?
Yeah, we should pass around the mic.
I'll give you the floating mic. So my Janet Jackson mic here, and then I'll go to this one.
What always fascinated me about Batman is that despite his rough exterior, at his core, he is like a child who doesn't want to see anybody die.
Right.
How do you deal with that sort of like, because his like whole thing against guns and thing against all that, and still his anger and frustration at crime? And a totally second question, like, what do you think what is like the Joker's purpose, and like did you ever imagine a past for him?
I'm not sure. So the first question is, how do you deal with Batman's what? Oh, I see what you mean.
Restate it so they can.
Yeah, how do you deal with the duality of wanting to stop crime but not being willing to kill? Would that be a good way to phrase it? Well, we talked about that line earlier of what he's not willing to cross, and obviously that's it. And it creates a really interesting contradiction, you know. So I mean, that's something I like exploring. It's the reason why, like, my favorite version of the Red Hood is what Judd was doing when he's basically a more effective Batman. It's basically like, if you wanted to stop crime, if you wanted to make a difference, you would kill. You would end people's lives. But then obviously that gets into the philosophical question of,
well, and that becomes
who am I to say they should die, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing I asked you earlier, which is, where is the point that's too far for Batman that people would say this isn't Batman anymore? And for me, that's if he kills somebody in cold blood. Like, that's the line where he starts to become not the character who we know. And it's different based on the original traumas, I think, of a lot of characters. I mentioned I mentioned the Punisher earlier, and one of the things with the Punisher is, it was very interesting having this conversation because it makes it very clear. The Punisher cannot have innocent people die due to collateral damage, because that's the basis of his whole war against crime, is because that's what happened to him. His family got killed, they were collateral damage. He can't blow up a building and have 4 people die accidentally and call it collateral damage, because it's against what the mission is. And that's the constant discussion and vacillation on the line with Batman.
Well, the other thing about Batman, though, if you think about it, like, if you look at the Tim Burton movies, like, he kills people. Like, there's a moment in Batman Returns where he literally takes a bomb and straps it to the big fat clown's, like, in his pants, and throws him in a hole, and the dude explodes. Like, and no one talks about that. In the first one, he pulls the Joker off. I mean, he basically dooms the Joker to death. And even in Begins, he tells Ra's al Ghul, I don't have to kill you, but I don't have to save you. That's kind of killing you in my book. But and it's weird because no one looks at that and says, well, it's not Batman, you know. But I think I would agree with what you're saying. Like, the line to me is like, people are going to die. It's a natural kind of, there is collateral damage in this line of work. You can't save everybody. Well, and but it's also not cold-blooded.
It's killing people only if it's in the service of saving innocent lives. Like, only if there's that choice. It's not stalking somebody down at night in their place and killing them.
You can tell how kind of dark and twisted Greg and I are, because I would totally have Batman kill the Joker, like, in a heartbeat. Like, that stuff would have been over after Jason Todd got blown up. Like, so I'm totally with Jason Todd on that one.
All right, are there any other questions?
Oh yeah, what's the second one?
Oh, sorry, second part of the question. And then why don't you guys just come up and line up, maybe? I think the camera's shooting from here, so maybe
do you want to line up on this side, guys?
On this side, yeah.
So we can block all of their view as well. Yeah, what was the second? Yeah, actually, just turn this.
Just turn it around, pick it up. There you go.
Okay. Oh, well. The second part of the question was, since Joker is such an ambiguous character, have you ever imagined a backstory with him, and, like, how do you deal with, like, sort of defining the Joker since he's so ambiguous?
I think the not having a backstory is much more interesting to me. Like, the ambiguity is interesting. Like, the last thing you would want to do is define who he was and where he came from. I mean, it's the reason why in The Dark Knight, that moment where the Joker, Heath Ledger, tells 2 different versions of his backstory is so interesting. Like, he's a force of nature. Like, if you're dealing with Batman as being this kind of, I don't want to say force of good, because that's such a cliched, overused, trite term, but if he's this force of good, the Joker is the exact opposite of that. And the second that you define him, he becomes a person. He doesn't become a concept. He doesn't become a cause anymore. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think yeah, go ahead.
No, it's also like they're very yin and yang, you know, in a way. And Joker, the difference is that Joker will adapt to play the dark side to whoever he's confronting. And so it makes sense not to pin him down and define him precisely, because in a way he sort of is all the chaos and the darkness.
Yeah.
What are your different views about the Batman movies, such as the Joel Schumacher movies? I mean, can't people just look at the Joel Schumacher movies as, even though it wasn't the real Batman, that for what they weren't bad movies, they just weren't the serious Batman movies? And will you forgive Batman for having a Bat credit card?
I wish I had a bad credit card. No, sorry, do you want to go first? I keep jumping.
Well, no, I mean, look, there's always different variations of these characters, you know, and it's so funny for me. Like, I ran into that like a Mack truck riding the Penguin, because you want to talk about a character in the Batverse that people bring a lot of different expectations and definitions to. It's the Penguin. I mean, I think that they all play a part in the mythology. I mean, for me, I'm partial to the darker, more contemporary imaginings of it because
That was better than the show. I'm just saying though that
they have a place. Yeah, I mean,
Here's the thing.
They weren't like. I understand that a lot of people were expecting Batman to be serious.
Keep
but
talking to the mic.
I understand Batman is supposed to be serious, but come on, can't you just say like Batman and Robin for a fun, campy superhero movie? It wasn't bad for a fun.
Well, it comes down to taste. I mean, it's not my cup of tea at all. But at the same time, like, I'm not a huge fan of the '60s show. Like, I like it. I grew up watching it. It was fun. But that is kind of the great thing about Batman is that, and it's the reason why Grant Morrison's run works. It's not my favorite. It's not my cup of tea. It's a little too out there and strange. But the fact of the matter is that Batman, if you look at Batman throughout the years, in the 70s, 60s, 70s, in the 70s it was crazy. I mean, or was it the 50s? I don't even know. Like there were
60s,
there were stories of him and Robin, the 60s or 70s. It is
the
60s. No, he's saying 70s.
Okay.
With
He looks like he
fighting the
knows. He looks like
Joker
a
on
pro.
the keyboard keys. Yeah, I mean that stuff is insane. So when you have a character that can stand all those different interpretations, it's what makes him, you can tell he's going to last for a long time. And that's why, whether it be the Schumacher movies or the Burton movies, or even now what Nolan's doing, they're different interpretations, but at his core, he's the same. Does that make sense? So yeah, I mean, yes. Will I rewatch Batman Forever? I have. It depends on how much I've had to drink. There has been a night that I remember within the last 3 years where we did put Batman and Robin on in my apartment. I don't remember getting through it. I don't think I got past Mr. Freeze singing.
Mr. Freeze.
What does he say? I'm
Chill out.
I'm Mr. White Christmas. I'm Mr. Yeah, exactly. So
I think you make a good point in that a lot of great archetypes can survive being interpreted through different time periods.
Right.
You know, and if you think about the ways that horror changed, you see horror movies in the 50s and they're all about like communism. It's all somebody is your neighbor and they look just like you, but they're really not. I mean, it's all like the threat of communism that's in there. And how horror movies evolve, they speak to the fears and concerns of whatever the contemporary, whatever's happening in the zeitgeist. And I think the Batman movies, in a way, have had so many different interpretations that they can reflect and mirror that.
And not only that, but Batman is, in and of himself, as a concept, there's something kind of supernatural about him. This is actually an argument that I've made regarding Nightwing, where I prefer a much more grounded Nightwing. I prefer much more crime-oriented, much more like those early Dixon issues of the Nightwing series that he did in like 97, 98 is much more about Nightwing basically against organized crime. And that's what I like with Batman as well, but Nightwing especially, because with Batman, you look at the different interpretations he's had over the years, there's something kind of otherworldly about that cape and cowl. And so he can exist fighting, you know, voodoo demon beasts, and you kind of buy it because a lot of artists with that cape, it's this silhouette, and there's almost something kind of otherworldly and supernatural about him. So he's much more impressionistic. You can do more with him.
Yeah.
You know.
Go ahead.
It's more like a different question. It's more like an answer with the girl's question before. She wanted to know why Batman didn't kill, and really, I think the point is that if you want Batman to kill, then really the fans aren't going to like him anymore, and he will lose his popularity and his pool of people like him. You know, we want him to be there. We want him to cherish people. We want him to not have people die. And if he does that, then I think that will really ruin the story and ruin the popularity of Batman itself. And my second point, one more, hold on. Back in the 60s, you know, the comedy part of Batman. The start of Batman was supposed to be dark and serious, but the show itself ruined it and really made fun of Batman. And I'm sorry if I'm offending anybody. I'm not trying to offend anybody. That's just my opinion. But that wasn't the point. I think that really the 60s ruined Batman, and you need to come back to really make that character more serious and dark. And now the movies, like Dark Knight, are more appropriate. It's more serious, it's more dark. It's not like Superman, more fun, happy-go-lucky, look at me, I can do it, I'm wonderful. But Batman is dark. And so that's just my answer to your question. Is that okay?
Sure,
Sorry.
sure. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and look, I mean, don't get me wrong. I prefer the dark Batman. That's what I want to read. That's what I want to write. And that's why I say like the Grant Morrison stuff, as fun as it is, like, and I'm just using that as an example of the most recent version I can think of, where he's a little lighter character, and it gets a little crazier. But look, at the end of the day, people have different tastes, and I think that all we were saying is that the fact that he's been able to survive as a character through these different interpretations is why he's so strong. And to the point about killing, I totally agree. I mean, it's that contradiction and right. But that's the thing. Like. Right.
That there's no magic ring.
Right. How's it going?
Hi. Not to dote too much on the movies, but I was kind of wondering on Penguin, Pain and Prejudice if there was any influence from the movie Batman Returns, because I did notice that Penguin's father's name is Tucker Cobblepot, which is the name in the Burton movie.
Okay, he's asking if there was any influence from the movies, the Danny DeVito version of the Penguin. There is only one, and it's the one that you named, and that's the father's name. One thing that I very expressly didn't want, which we had in the artist who I'm working with is called Szymon Kudranski. He's an incredible, dark, moody, sort of photorealist Polish artist. And his early sketches had the flipper hands, the kind of fin hands, and I didn't want that. I didn't want to make him just some sort of freak of nature where he is obviously distorted and disgusting. That wasn't the point. I felt like that was almost too easy for what I was trying to get at, which was to have him be somebody who looks different, but it's not wildly outside of the range of the human experience. He's somebody who looks different and was picked on because of that, and has certain grudges and resentments and fears because of that. But I wanted to make him realer, and it's a reason why I also wrote in a relationship with his mom that's very different than one might expect.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Hi.
Well, actually, both gentlemen before took my questions about the film, so I'll just go little geek,
Sure.
little fanboy here.
Hit it.
You guys have talked about you've both worked for Marvel and DC, and you're both familiar with characters from those two universes. So if you could write any Marvel DC team up or Marvel DC fight, what would you want to write?
I have a couple, actually. I would totally write a Winter Soldier Nightwing fight, which would be a lot of fun. Oh man, you want to take an next? I gotta think about this.
I would love to do Hulk Batman.
Deathstroke and Deadpool would be a lot of fun. Actually, Joe Kelly did a version of that in a Superman Batman annual a few years ago that was hysterical.
My favorite crossover ever is Marvel did a crossover where the Punisher fights Archie. Did any of you guys read that? It's incredible. But I think the Punisher and Batman would be cool, would be really cool too, because neither one of them has supernatural powers, but they both can get, they're just unbelievable grit and determination and nastiness and a lot of experience with gadgetry. So that would be fun, but that's like the non-superhero version of the book.
Right.
Now, when you said Hulk and Batman, did you mean fighting each other or teaming up?
Sorry?
When you said Hulk and Batman, did you mean fighting each other or teaming up?
Fighting each other.
Okay. I just felt I had to clarify.
Yeah.
Now, how much freedom do you have under the DC, especially with something like Nightwing? Can you go into Batman and be like, this is something I want to do? And Batman's like, no, you have to do you have to go in my universe. How much control do you have?
I'm really distracted by whatever
he asked
that is.
How much freedom you have, like when you're writing Nightwing, to do whatever you want with the character, versus DC coming to you and saying, no, it has to be this kind of story. You can't.
I don't have a lot of freedom, to be honest. I mean, I do and I don't. At the end of the day, DC is going to weigh in and determine what they want the book to be, and they should. I mean, it's their property. I mean, they have every right to do that. For example, it was DC really wanted the. Sorry. What? Does anyone know what's going on over there? Like, are there like strippers?
Chippendales, yeah.
It's all that's over there.
It's all what?
All that, the Nickelodeon
All
show.
that? That's still on the air? I didn't care about it when it was on. What? All right, well, that's really depressing. Okay, so, so for example, DC really wanted the circus to be a big part of the book. Left to my own devices, probably would not have brought the circus in. What we're doing with the circus, I can say, is going to be very, very, very cool, and no one will see it coming. Like, where it's going to ultimately go out of this first arc is completely my own. So there's a lot of times there's parameters from DC about here's kind of what we want the book to be, because you got to remember they're juggling 52 different titles on ongoings plus miniseries, and so they don't want a lot of things to feel the same. It's the reason why, I'm trying to think of examples. I mean, Batman feels different than Batwoman. Batwoman's a bit more supernatural. It's why, Nightwing is dealing with more of the circus. They just don't want. They want to have kind of variety across the line.
I have a good amount of freedom. In what I write. I think part of that is I come in from, like I said, I come from novels. I also produce and write TV. I produced the TV show called, did a lot of writing for the TV show called V, which was really fun. I do screenplays. And so for me, usually by the time I come to pitch a comic book project, it's pretty fully formed in my mind. And so I'm able to say, here's what I want to do. Are you in or out, kind of? And they own the characters, so they'll have feedback to, there's funny stuff like you can't do, what's the swearing called when it's like hashtag at, what's that called again?
I don't know, but they don't.
You can't swear that way, which you can do in Marvel. I mean, like, there's corrections like that where I have to fit the format. DC's 20 pages, Marvel's 22.
Not anymore.
Marvel dropped to 20.
Marvel went to 20.
But there's certain things where if I push too far with a character, we'll talk about it. But for the most part, I come in, and it's why I like working in miniseries a lot, or in specific arcs, like I did on the Punisher, because we can sort of agree on something up front, and then that's more or less what I'm writing. But at the end of the day, they own those characters and they have to protect them. So I'm not going to come in and propose something that's ridiculous and out of the box, because there's no way they would do it, or they would just say no to begin with. And that's happened too, where I've said, here's what I want to do, and they say it doesn't work.
I should clarify. I mean, there's definitely a dialogue that goes on, and I mean, like, I'll develop, like right now I just had to turn in overviews for what I want to do for the next couple issues, and I'm rewriting some stuff on issue 6 and 7 right now. But going forward, especially with how the book is going to relate to Batman and what Scott's doing, I have a really big arc that they're very excited about, and I brought it to them, and so it's a back and forth. I guess the way I should probably phrase it is that they don't. I can't just go off and write the next 6 issues without telling them what it's going to be. So.
My question was very similar to his, so I'm going to go ahead and elaborate on that. With the new 52, you guys are, it seems like it's much more coherent than the reboot was after Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Right.
It seems like there's a lot more like a plan for what the reboot's going to be like. I'm wondering if that's top down, if you guys have like a Bible that you have to follow now, or if the writers are kind of working together on creating that new continuity.
Sorry, I lost the. 1 second. It's top down. DC decided they wanted to do the reboot, and to their credit, Dan DiDio and Jim Lee and Bob Harris and Eddie Berganza have all they started with what books they wanted to do internally, and the other editors as well weighed in, and they decided what they wanted, and they decided what the flavor of each is going to be. In terms of how they relate to each other, I mean, yeah, we're figuring it out as we go. Like, it's not like there's not a Bible of everything that happened in continuity that we are able to reference or not able to reference. There was a timeline that I got early on that said where every character has been for the last 5 years and basically what storylines kind of happened and what didn't. But you know, a lot of the Batman continuity did happen. A lot of the Green Lantern continuity did happen. A lot of other continuity didn't happen. So there is kind of there's an element of figuring it out, which is fun. And then, you know, you have certain things like, you know, in the Bat universe, like, for example, Deathstroke doesn't have a connection to Teen Titans anymore. So he's not a Teen Titan. He wasn't a Teen Titans villain, as you're going to see in upcoming issues. So then it creates that interesting question of, like, well, how do they know each other? Do Nightwing and Deathstroke even know each other? Was Nightwing a Titan? Like, you know, you figure it out as you go a little bit. So it's just the nature of a reboot like that. So.
Okay. I was wondering, what are your thoughts on the Penguin being portrayed as a British guy in Arkham City?
Oh, yeah. Do you know about that? The Penguin is British. He's Cockney in Arkham City, the video game.
Video game? Yeah, I mean, I do know about that. I'm not a big video game guy, so I haven't played it, but that's been a big source of conversation, hasn't it? I mean, for me, he's kind of old school. Like, I like the origins of the family the way that Kyle wrote it in Gates of Gotham. For me, he's sort of very old school, from an old Gotham family all the way back, you know. So that's always been the way that I've gone with it. But he kind of has a little bit of that, you know, dandy / toff dressing style, you know. So, I mean, I can understand where they made the jump, but it's not how I think of him in my head.
Hey guys, just wanted to know if you had to pick one character from the Bat universe to live next to, who would it be?
To live next to?
Let's see. I would probably go Harley Quinn, because she would, like, she'd be awesome dinner company. I feel like I could go over there with, like, I don't know, cookies and wine and just, like, hang out and watch Friends. Like, she'd just be fun, right? No?
I'd probably pick the Joker because my office is on the second floor and I have great windows, so it's really good spying on the neighbors. And just like to see the stuff that he gets up to. You'll have some sense in my Penguin art, my Penguin stories, like my notion of what the Joker does when he thinks nobody's watching. So that's who I'd want to live next to peek through the windows.
All right, thanks a lot, guys.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Is money a viable superpower?
Is what?
Is money a viable superpower?
I think it can buy you some awesome superpowers if you know the right guy.
Well, because, yeah, it's like, what's Bruce Wayne if he's broke without all the gadgets?
Right.
You know, he's just, I guess he's more like Frank Castle, isn't he?
That's is money love?
Yes, money's love. I can answer that definitively here.
Everyone that says money isn't love doesn't have money. I don't have money, but if I had money, I'm pretty sure I could get someone to love me. Like, right? Like, that's
how it works.
That's how it works.
You guys, take that one to the bank. Well, look, we both want to thank you all for coming out. It's really great questions. It's really great to meet, you know, dug-in hardcore fans like this. So we appreciate your coming out, and have a good rest of Comikaze.